Hey, it's great to be here with you all. I don't know if you experienced the same thing I did when you walked out your front door this morning and said, fall has arrived and it's about time, I think. I don't know about some of you. You may realize that Elise and I, my wife, moved here from Indiana. It's been about in the 30s every morning there probably for the last 3 or 4 weeks. But this morning you wake up, you walk outside, you feel the mist of the rain hitting your face, and you see the leaves kind of falling on the ground a little bit. It just reminds you that fall is here, and it's Halloween, right, this week. We've got a bunch of kids in the service this morning, so kids, I'm sure you're ready to get your Halloween costumes on and get some of that candy, that trick-or-treating. Trick-or-treating always an interesting thing. I can remember one year in Anderson, Indiana, where I was growing up, that we had snow on the ground on Halloween that evening there. We were walking out. I was dressed as a pumpkin that year. I was a cute kid, so come on. You're all asking what happened. I don't know what happened. I'm not cute anymore. So, we've got Trunk or Treat here at the church tonight, and it starts at 5 o'clock. I've been putting ads on Facebook all week. Some of you guys have been seeing that. I believe we've got a lot of people from the community who are going to be coming out for Trunk or Treat. Now, if you're like me, you thought Trunk or Treat is coming up, and then you walked out your front door this morning and thought, man, you're really going to have to stand in the parking lot for an hour in the cold tonight. Well, suffer for Jesus, okay? I want to encourage everybody to come on out. If you haven't signed up to have your car there as one of the Trunk or Treat stations, you could probably still do that. But I encouraged you last week that I want us to come out and force as a church. You know, there's a rule about church that they say 10% of the people do 90% of the work at the church, okay? And if you're sitting here thinking, well, I haven't done much in the church at all, this is your opportunity to break that trend, okay? Listen, there are going to be people from the neighborhood, people who maybe don't have a church home. More importantly, they may not know Jesus. And this is our opportunity to be the church. Now, there's some times when you have events like this, where we like to feel good about people coming and being in our parking lot. And we say, oh, we had 500 people at Trunk or Treat, or we had 1,000 people at Trunk or Treat. And we feel really good about that, but the next Sunday, not a one of them showed up in church. Okay? Now, I've not been here for one of these, so I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but I've been at churches where that happens. And let me tell you, church, that it's not good enough for people just to show up for Trunk or Treat. I want them to come to our church. I want them to become a part of the life of the church, but more importantly, we want them to come to know Jesus. And the way that can happen is if we show up in force. All right? Don't just expect, so-and-so to do it because they're the ones who always do it. Put on an extra jacket, throw your scarf on, whatever. Come on out tonight and just meander in the parking lot. If you don't have another job, just meander in the parking lot and shake hands, okay? And say, hey, I'm so-and-so, and I go to church here, and just wanted to say hello and greet you. I want everybody to come on out. And I know it's going to be cold, so what we're going to do is we're going to have the foyer area back there with the glass. That's going to be unlocked so people can come in there and get warmed up if they need to, all right? So don't worry, we're not going to be here for 4 hours. It's not 20 degrees. Let me tell you, last year at Indianapolis First, the church that I came from, we did a Feeding the Homeless event, and that day it was negative 15 degrees. And that Sunday morning, I was in charge of that event. That Sunday morning, we did the event Sunday night. That Sunday morning, we walked into church, and I was met with a whole bunch of people at the door saying, Pastor, are we really going to be out there in the cold tonight? Can we cancel it? Can we reschedule it? And all I could think about was the people who have to live out there all the time in that weather. And I just want to encourage you, church, that I know it's going to be chilly. I know all of that. But can we please come out in force tonight and greet our neighborhood and get to know our neighborhood? I just think it's a great opportunity for us. So come on out tonight. The other thing, Lori made a great announcement about our Thanksgiving community dinner. If you're not familiar with this, every year we do a community dinner for everyone in the neighborhood who wants to come. And the blessing bags that she was mentioning are your ways of being able to provide and bless the people from our neighborhood who may not have the ability to provide themselves with those things. So please donate to that. And we have one other interesting thing coming up. This is new to the calendar. This is a youth fundraiser, okay? November 12th, that's 2 Sundays from now. What we're going to be doing is a teen pie auction, okay? Teen pie auction. You may have no idea what I'm talking about, okay? But here's how it works. Sunday morning, you all bring in items that you baked. It could be cookies, could be cupcakes, could be pies, whatever, okay? Do you bake pies? Yeah, you do, okay? I don't know anything about pies. I don't make pies. Bring them Sunday morning, and then Sunday night, 5 p.m., we'll all get together over in the Family Life Center. And what I'll do is I'll be your auctioneer. I'll get up, I'll auction the items off, okay? Maybe a pie will sell for $2, $3. Maybe it'll sell for $10, $15, whatever. The idea is we'll be sitting at round tables. You buy that pie, you can choose to share it with the other people at your table, or you can keep it for yourself, take it home, all right? And we'll just have a good night doing that. But we need a couple of things. One, we need you to bake your favorite desserts, okay? To bake your favorite desserts and bring them that Sunday morning, November 12th. The other thing we need is to show up. It's a great time of fellowship, and all the proceeds will be going towards helping our teens go to our winter retreat this year, okay? And it's really important for our youth, our teenagers, to be able to do that. And this is the way that they're going to be able to financially be able to do so. Okay? So we'll talk about that more coming up. I'm sorry for giving you ads here at the beginning of the message, but this is part of being the church. Okay? So we're thankful that you're all here. And who's glad to be in church this morning? Anybody? Hey! If you're not, just look at someone next to you and maybe they'll give you some of their joy. Okay? Anyway, if you're a visitor, I want to welcome you. I'm Pastor Cam, and we had the great worship team up here leading us this week. We're so thankful for them, and Pastor Cheryl came up and did some of our announcements and our offering earlier. If you've never met us, if I've never had a chance to meet you, come up and say hi at the end of the service, okay? I usually try to make my way back to the foyer, but if I don't make it back there, just come say hi. I'd love to meet you. And it's great to be here this morning. I'm excited because we are continuing in our series called Abide. All right? Abide. It's ancient practices for enjoying God. Now, the last couple of weeks, we've looked at a couple of different things. We've talked about prayer, and we talked about reading your Bible and being in the Word, and how important those things are in order to continue in your relationship with God. Now, it is not because we do things and we perform that we are with God, or that we can enjoy favor with God. But if we don't do things in our relationship, if we don't spend time in prayer, reading Scripture and all of that, if we don't spend time coming to church, how could we ever expect that we would be able to hear from God? And what I mean by that is this. Let's say you had a car, which I'm guessing some of you do. You have a car, you want to get from point A to point B, but you get in there and turn it on, and there's no gas in it. You can't get there, right? You can't get there if you don't have any gas, and your car won't turn on. All right? Spending time in prayer, spending time in the Word, spending time with the Lord is like putting fuel in your spiritual gas tank. Does that make sense? It's going to make you go. It's going to make you be able to get to where God wants you to be. Now, putting gas in your car does not make it a car, right? Your gas has nothing to do with making that thing into a car. In fact, if all you ever did was put gas in the car, you never did any other maintenance, your car would break down, right? So the point that I'm making this morning is that spending time with the Lord in prayer, in study, in worship, in the church, and all these other things that we've talked about is how we continue on our journey with the Lord. Does that make sense? So this is what we've been working through. In particular, we've had two passages as our main passages that we've been looking at for this entire series. And those are from John chapter 15, which is going to be my main text this morning. So if you want to flip there, you're welcome to do so. And the other is from 2 Peter chapter 1. These are both incredible verses, incredible passages. And they're so deep. They have incredible depth. And they could mean a number of different things. And what I mean by that is this, that this John chapter 15, if you can split the book of John into 3 sections. And the third section is kind of God's instruction to people. There's this term, this Hebrew term that sounds like this, ego eimi, okay? Ego eimi. And what it means is I am. Okay, that's the Greek word there. I'm sorry, I said Hebrew, I meant Greek. It's an I am statement. It's all these statements that Jesus makes saying, I am this, therefore go and do this. Does that make sense to us this morning? And so here we have in John chapter 15 an I am statement. It says this, in verse 1, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, and also I will remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. Now we hear a metaphor here, and Jesus speaks in parables a lot. There's an interesting thing about parables. A parable is a story that Jesus told to get across a central point. Okay? We know the parables, the prodigal son, right? We've heard that. We know the parable, the farmer sowing the seeds, right? We've heard all of these things, okay? These are parables, and they have a central theme. This is a little bit different. It's an extended metaphor. The Hebrew term here is maslach, okay? It's one of those terms you get to, it's fun to do that every once in a while, right? In school, when I was learning some of the Hebrew words, our professor would make an entire class of people go, maslach, right? So, can we do that? No, I'm just kidding. We're not going to do that today. I don't want you all spitting on the back of the head of the person in front of you. This is an extended metaphor. And what that means is this Hebrew term, maslach, it means that this story could have a number of different lessons for us to learn from it. And you can tell already how rich it is. I mean, there's a number of things that if I just read that passage to you, you might think, oh, we could learn a lot of things from this passage, Pastor. There's a lot of ways that we could apply this to our life. And that's what Jesus is doing here. This maslach is known as the bullseye of John the later part of John. What do you mean by that? Bullseye. Like, we have some people who like to do some target practice. Maybe some guys or ladies who like to go down to the gun range. Some of you have been hunting. Do I have any hunters in the crowd today? Yep, a few people have been hunting this year so far. You know what it means when it says to hit the bullseye on something, right? If you're hunting, you know where you need to hit on that animal. If you're in the gun range, you know where you need to shoot, right? The bullseye means to make a perfect shot, right? Right in the middle. And this passage is known by scholars as the bullseye maslach. What that means is that all of John chapters basically 12 up to here can all be boiled down to this passage. It's the bullseye. It's the heart of the matter. In John chapter 15, as we're reading, we can see multiple different meanings that this could take. But Jesus here is speaking to a type of people who were faithful in attending temple, who were faithful in doing the religiosity, the religious things of their culture. But maybe the lines as to who was a true follower or not had been blurred. What I mean by that is this: there were a lot of people who claimed to be followers of Yahweh, of God, but failed to live true, authentic lives of relationship with Him. Okay? The lines had been blurred. And so Jesus gives us this bullseye passage, the heart of the matter, right down the middle, right down the middle. It's baseball season, World Series, you all know what I mean when you throw a fastball right down the middle, right? And this is a passage that you've got to get it. And he says it this way, and it's blunt, it's bold. And what he says is this, let me read it again. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. This is an interesting passage here. It would have meant something different to you and I than it meant to the Israelites there. This term vine is used often throughout the Old Testament. In fact, I wanted to share with you Psalm chapter 80, verses 8 through 9 says this: You transplanted a vine from Egypt. You drove out the nations and planted it. You cleared the ground for it, and it took root and filled the land. The reason why I mention that is because all throughout the Old Testament, the vine is known as Israel, not God. Okay? So here we have Jesus referencing the vine, which would have brought back memories to the people. And they would have always thought that their country, their people, their culture was the vine. But what John 15 says is, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. I am the true vine. Who's speaking? Jesus is. Jesus is saying, I am the vine, my Father is the gardener, and he cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. So now it doesn't say here, you are the branches, but it's implied. that if Jesus is the vine, God is the gardener, the Father is the gardener, and you and I are the branches. Okay? Now, being good Nazarenes, we probably don't know that much about vineyards and vines and, all that kind of stuff, but, we can enjoy some grapes every once in a while. That's okay, isn't it? Here we have this passage that's talking about vines and branches and vineyards and gardeners and all of that. Now, what you and I may not realize is that these vines, they would kind of grow like crazy. I was talking with Angie. Where are you? It's funny that we were talking about that this morning. She was telling me how she has these vines that probably someone planted, maybe you guys planted them at some point, wanting to make a nice cover the wall of their house, but they've just gone out of control. Anyone ever had that happen with vines? I know here in the South, I've read about the kudzu vine. You ever heard? Is that how you say that word? That's just vine that just is an invasive species that just takes over and it goes wherever it wants. And you can't hardly kill it, right? You can't kill it. And Angie was telling me how they have this vine that's growing up the side of their house and they're worried it's going to mess up the eaves on their home and make their roof unreliable and all of this. So she wasn't able to be with us last Sunday at church because she'd hurt herself because she was working so hard trying to kill all these vines. It's crazy, right? Well, here we have this extended metaphor that Jesus is using here to help us understand that if he is the vine, then we are the branches. For the Israelites, like I said, they would have thought of themselves as the vines. Remember, Psalm 80 said, you have been transplanted from Egypt like a vine. Okay? So Jesus is flipping the script here, so to speak. Taking them from the object like they normally think of themselves and putting himself as the object, as the focus of this metaphor. All right? We know vines, they can take off, they can grow. Jesus says, I am the vine, meaning he is wanting to grow. He's wanting to move forward, wanting to do a good work in the world. God is the gardener, the one who prunes and guides and directs that vine towards where it needs to be growing. And you are the branches. All right? You are the branches. And he cuts off, in verse 2, he cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. While every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you, in verse 3. Verse 4 says, remain in me as I also remain in you. In the King James Version, that passage says, abide in me as I will also abide in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. The passage goes on to say in verse 5, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, though, you can do nothing. In verse 6, if you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this, so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. Love this passage. But here's the thing. When the pastor reads the whole passage like that, sometimes we're like, oh, we zone out, right? We kind of lose focus halfway through that. Here's what's really interesting, okay? If you know much about plants, you know that the plant is pulling the energy, the nutrients, and all that from the roots, right? And it's growing and sending those out so that it can grow new leaves, grow new fruit, okay? Whatever that may look like for that specific plant. But those leaves that it grows gather the energy then from the sun and the rain and all of that and pull it back into the plant and help the plant to grow. Does that make sense? So what this is saying is, if you remain in me, I will remain in you. It's a symbiotic relationship, okay? If the plant had no roots, it couldn't grow the leaves that gather the energy from the sun. But if the plant had no leaves, it couldn't gather the energy from the sun, and the roots would wither and rot. Okay? And so what God is saying here, what Jesus is saying here, is I am the gardener. A gardener is going to see those parts of the plant that are not productive, that are not healthy. It's going to see the fruit, maybe that is infected. It's going to see the branches that are infected, or it's going to see the part of the vine that's growing where it shouldn't be. And the gardener's going to cut that off. If there's part of the plant that is withering, it'll be cut off. Anybody ever had to prune a plant way back? I'm not talking about trying to kill a plant. I'm saying prune it way back. And when I was growing up, we had this awesome weeping willow, cherry willow, something like that, tree right in front of our house. And in Huntington, Indiana, it was a beautiful tree. And when we moved in, it was, maybe this tall. And when we moved out of that house, about 10 years later, 14 years later, the thing was, 15 feet tall. It was a beautiful tree. But every year, the thing would just grow its long willow fronds all the way down to the ground. They'd hit the ground, and they'd start to get rotted and gross because they were touching the ground and always wet. So every year, we had to prune that plant way back so that it was healthy. And I can remember being a little boy watching my mom and dad take hedge trimmers and all that to that tree, and it's like all that's left is this little thing. I'm like, that was such a beautiful tree. Why did we have to do that? My mom and dad explained that that's the way that you keep it healthy. It's the way that you keep it healthy. If you didn't do that, it would end up hurting the plant itself. And so what Jesus is saying here is that I am the vine. Okay, I am the one who is providing the growth. I'm the one who is going in the direction that you ought to be going. But you are the branches. And the branches might split off and go in different directions. Directions that aren't healthy. Directions that aren't good for you as the branch or the whole plant. And so the Father will prune those back. It's interesting, though, if you look back in John chapter 15, Jesus says two things. He says, first off, He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, He prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. Okay? So there's two things. One, plants that are not going to be fruitful or branches that are not going to be fruitful, He cuts off, He gets rid of. And two, the ones that are going to be fruitful, He prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. All right? There's two things. The first word there is a Greek word, altaia. Okay? That's the word for cut off. And then the other word is kateia. That's the word for clean or prune. They're different words. They mean different things. If we just look directly at this text and applied it to the church, we could very easily see a few interesting things. Just a moment ago, we were talking about the Fall Fest, and I told you that the old adage for church is that 10% of the people do 90% of the work. Okay? Those 10% of the people, we all know who they are, probably in our church or any church. You know who the person is that's going to do that thing, right? You know that if we're talking about blessing bags, you go to Lori, right? She's the one who knows about it. We know if we're talking about this event, you go to that person, or this event, you go to this person. But here's the problem. We are all branches in this plant. Right? We're all branches in this plant. So if one person is expected to do all of that work, that plant, that branch, is not going to be as good as it could be. It's not going to be as strong. Can you imagine if you had an entire apple tree and it produced tons and tons of apples, and they were great apples, but they all grew on one branch? That branch would just be like, it'd be bent over, and eventually it would die and fall off. What this passage is saying is that the branches that produce fruit, sometimes they need to be pruned back so that fruit can grow on other branches, so that they can be even more fruitful. And if you looked at that same apple tree and saw that there was a big branch that had all, like, it was long and big, it had sub branches going off of it everywhere, but it didn't have any leaves or fruit on it, you'd think, I don't want the energy of the plant going into this branch that's not producing fruit. So I'm going to cut this branch off so that the energy that's going towards it can be supplied to other branches. The same thing is true in the church. If 10% of the people are doing all of the work, if 10% of the people are what is making the church go, and then there are all of these other people who are just here absorbing, they're what we might call consumers. All right? Consumers. We talked about this a little bit before. Meaning people who show up to church and just consume what's here, but never actually contribute to the further growth of the church. You could do the same thing going through the drive-thru at Taco Bell. Yeah? You go there, you get some food, you pay them for it, you go drive on, but you have nothing to do with the actual health of that Taco Bell or whatever restaurant. Insert your favorite restaurant here. except for the money that you provided to it. Last week we talked about faithfulness and giving. I'm not interested in being a church where we have people who just sit here and consume and tithe thinking, I'm giving back to the church. Because you might as well just go through the drive-thru at Taco Bell. You know? You're being a consumer if that's what your mentality is. Jesus is saying there are certain branches that are going to produce fruit, and we know that. But if we allow those branches to be the only branches that produce fruit, then it's going to sap the energy and strength from the others, and they're not going to be able to be as strong as they need to be able to produce that fruit. What am I saying? I'm saying this, that we all are a part of this organism that is the church. And we all have to be an active part of it. Now, I'm saying something interesting here, church. I don't mean just the people who have been coming here for 15 years or 20 or their whole life. Okay? I don't mean just the people who are real good Christians already. I don't mean the person who, we know everybody would say that person's holier than anything. They're great. I don't mean just those people. I mean all of us. All of us. We're here. We're a part of the plant. And Jesus is saying, look, if you're just a consumer, if you're just receiving the energy that the plant has to offer, but you are not providing fruit for the kingdom, what he's saying is those plants, those branches, in order to keep the plant healthy, should be cut off. What are you saying, Pastor? Saying I shouldn't come to church anymore? No, I'm not saying that. You keep on coming. But I want you to think about your life. Think about the impact that you have. Are you someone who consumes? Or are you someone who helps the church grow? And I don't just mean the church as in this church. I mean fruit as in the kingdom. Capital C church. You know what I mean when I say that? Big C church. This Roanoke First is little c church. It's lowercase, right? Capital C church means the kingdom, the body of Christ. It means those people next to you who may not already be believers, if you go and talk to them about Jesus and they accept Christ, but they end up going to the other church just down the street instead of Roanoke First, boy, I'd love to have them here, but I'm more happy that they're a follower of God than anything else. Okay? That's the most important thing. But invite them here first, okay? Yeah. Invite them to come here first, okay? The point is this, that we have to be producing fruit. If we're not producing fruit, then we need to be cut off. If we're not producing fruit, then there's no point in us doing anything that we are doing. There's no point in us showing up at church other than just to be a consumer. Well, let me tell you this, we're in the internet age, right? So you can get on your computer, you can turn on your TV, and you can hear any preacher, probably a better preacher than me, You can put any music, worship music on that you wanted. You could listen to the best of the best worship songs, and you could feel good about yourself. But that's being a consumer. That's just absorbing nutrients, but not actually doing anything to grow the kingdom. We've been talking about abiding in Christ, ancient practices for enjoying God. Abide. This word abide means to be in, right? To spend time immersed in. It's not an easily definable word other than to say that it's like spending time with somebody or something or God, but more than just spending time with, it's like allowing the presence of yourself to be one with that person. Abide in me, and I will abide in you. I brought a branch with me today. Now, this is a silver maple branch. It's never going to produce fruit, okay, because it doesn't really produce fruit, at least the kind of things that you and I would want to eat. I just cut it off the tree out here before I came in this morning, and some of you, Pastor Cheryl saw me. He's like, what's the pastor doing, cutting branches off the trees on Sunday morning? Just losing my mind, that's all. No. I want the kids especially to pay attention to this part, okay? This branch, look at it. Yep. Do you see any fruit on it? No. I didn't think so. Okay. Now, do you think this branch will ever grow fruit? Yes. You do? Let me ask it this way. Where's the rest of the tree? It's out by the parking lot. It's still growing there. But I could glue it back together. You're right. This branch is cut off. You know, it's not part of the tree anymore. You know, and so eventually what this means, kids, is that it's going to run out of energy. Like, these leaves are still alive right now. Yeah, but it's going to die. It's going to die because it's not connected to the tree. Right? So if it's not connected to the tree, it's not going to get any water from the roots anymore, right? It's just bad for it. Yeah, plain and simple. It's just bad for it. Church, does that make sense? If this branch is cut off from the tree, it's just bad for it. It's not going to grow. And no matter how much this branch could sit here like this, I could hold it. And I kind of used this illustration with the glove a couple of weeks ago. You all remember the glove that I had out? No matter how much I look at this branch and say, produce fruit, grow fruit, it's not going to do it. It's not going to do it. No matter how much I want it to, I could stick this branch in a cup of water. Do you think it would grow fruit then? No? Yeah? No? It might for a little while. But what happens, kids, when someone puts flowers in a cup of water? They're healthy for a little while, right? But eventually they die. What if they didn't pick it? What do you mean? If you left them in the ground? There you go. She said something interesting here. What if you left it in the dirt? Or put it in a vase or a pot that had some dirt in it, and you kept it watered, and you gave it the nutrients that it needed? It'd still grow, right? Yeah. Exactly. And that's what Jesus is saying here. He's saying, look, abide in me, and I will abide in you. Be connected to me, and I will be connected to you. But if this branch had none of these leaves on it, had nothing that it was going to do for the rest of the tree, it was just there, eventually it would wither up and dry and just fall off. Because it has no purpose. Eventually the tree would just kind of let it die. And so what Jesus is saying here is he's saying, look, abide in me and I will abide in you. My Father is like a gardener who sees the branches that provide fruit and he prunes them so that they might grow to be more healthy. That's the first lesson I want us to take home today, church. It's this, that if you are someone who is seeking after God, you're trying your best, you're trying to be following after Him, one, continue on that journey no matter what you may face in life, because God is doing a good work in you, okay? And you may face trials, you may face difficult times, and so there may be times in your life when you feel like you're being pruned. You may face challenges that are difficult. And God may be pruning you through those things, helping you to get healthier so that you can produce even more fruit. Okay? The second thing is this, that if you are a branch who is just hanging on to the tree, just kind of bringing in the nutrients, but not producing any fruit, we've all seen trees that have a bunch of healthy branches on them and then a few that are dead, right? Those branches aren't healthy anymore, and eventually they'll fall off. Jesus is saying that my Father is the gardener who sees the branches that produce good fruit, prunes them so that they can continue to do so, and when He sees branches that are dying or that are not producing fruit, He will cut them off. You see, John is writing to people, and Jesus is speaking to people who had become very wishy-washy in their faithfulness in church. And what I mean by that is this, they kind of came, they consumed, they absorbed, but when they went out, their lives just looked like everyone else. There was no clear delineation as to who was a God follower and who was not. And so he's saying, if you are someone who is not faithful, if you are someone who is not producing fruit, then God will cut you off. Does that mean that someone's going to kick you out of the church? No. But what it might mean is that you'll sit here in the same seat I'm not thinking of anyone specific when I say this, but you'll sit there in the same seat year after year, And you know what? You'll hear the worship. Some of you have seen multiple pastors in this church in your lifetime. Some of you have probably seen 4 or 5, maybe more. People come and go. And it just seems like year after year, things are just the same. Maybe you're sitting there thinking, well, now we got this young pastor, and he's going to change everything that I like about this place. Maybe the worship team does a song with something that's not your style. Maybe the pastor uses too many visual illustrations in his messages. And you're thinking, this is my church. Why are we doing things like this? This is not how. And your attitude just kind of gets embittered. I'm not saying there's anybody that I've known like that at this church, okay? But I've known a lot of people like that. I've known a lot of people like that. And anytime that something gets changed or whatever, they just kind of, the first ones to complain. The Lord says if you are a dead and withering branch, you're going to be cut off because you're not healthy to the church. You're not healthy to the vine. And so I want to challenge you. The first challenge was if you are someone who is seeking after God, then He may prune some things in you so that fruit can be produced on other branches as well. He may prune some things on you so that you are more healthy. The second thing is this, that if you are an unhealthy branch, then you may sit there and just eventually you don't feel the life of the Spirit of God in you anymore. And how do you get that way? How do you get that way? It's not because you hate everything. It's not because you don't like the pastor. It's because maybe in some way you weren't abiding in God. Let me clearly say, I said at the beginning of the message, if you don't put fuel in the gas tank, your car won't go, right? And the same thing is true of our spiritual relationship with God. If we're not spending time with Him, how can we expect that He might spend time with us? I would never expect my wife to feel close to me if I never talked to her. How could I expect that God would be able to spend time with, or that I would ever be able to hear or feel or listen or follow after Him in the way that He would want me to if I never actually spent time with Him? You see, the plant, the leaves, the branches, they gather energy and send it back to the tree, but the tree also sends the energy out. And the thing is, if I'm never spending time, if I'm not healthy, if I'm not trying to absorb God's Spirit around me, if I'm not coming to church and worshiping truly and authentically, if I'm not spending time in prayer and worship daily, then how can I expect that I will be a healthy branch? Here's the thing. We are just like the church that Jesus is writing to here in America today. There is no clear delineating factor as to who a Christian is and who a Christian isn't in this world. Do you know what I mean when I say that? You could go out of here and walk down the street and ask people, do you believe in God? And you would find tons of people who said, I believe in God. But guess what? It's Sunday morning and they're not in church. Because our culture is full of people who are nominal Christians. Meaning they say that they are Christians, but in all reality they are not. And I'm going to go so far to say that the Christian church in America, not the people who weren't in church on Sunday morning, but the church, the people who are here, maybe in Roanoke first, maybe in capital C big church across the country, that the church itself is full of people who maybe even did get up, put on their suit and go to church that morning, but the reality is that they are not truly God followers. They may be Christian in name, but not in their spirit. What do I mean by that? And what's the challenge for us today? To be living branches. To be people who are spending time with the Lord. You know, I didn't do this sermon series because I wanted to tell you all the things you ought to be doing as Christians. You ought to be reading your Bible, you ought to be praying, you ought to be giving to the church. I didn't do that. I want Roanoke First Church to be the healthiest church that it can be. And maybe that means that there are a whole, that we've got to go to 2 services someday. Or maybe that means that we've just got, the 150 people that we've got here who are extremely faithful to the Lord and are faithful and are going out and trying to reach people and bring people into the relationship with God. I don't know, but I want us to be the healthiest church possible. More importantly than that, I want us to be God followers. I want every single person who is in this room to be over there with me one day. I don't want any of us to miss it. I don't want any of us to miss it. And so we've been doing this sermon series, Abide in Me, and I will abide in you, okay? Because if I could just grab every single one of you and shake you by your shoulder, maybe not you all, but just people who are like these branches that just consume but don't actually grow. And I'm not saying anybody specific in our church. I'm just saying if I could grab every single person who's like that in the world, every single church person who's sitting there complaining about this and that and the other thing, if I could grab every person who had claimed to have the light of God in their life and shake them by their shoulders and say, get real, because there's a world of lost people out there and we're missing it because we're worried about the color of the carpet, we're worried about worship, we're worried about this and that and the other thing. Jesus Christ doesn't care about any of that. He cares about lost souls. He cares about the fruit being produced. If our church is not producing fruit, then we are a withering branch. If your relationship with God is not producing fruit, then there is something that is cutting you off from the vine. So how? How do we get back? Abide in Him, and He will abide in us. This is the point, church. Until we get real about being in the Word, until we get real about spending time talking to our Lord, until we get real about allowing our faith to be true and authentic and not just a thing that we do, God cannot use us. Not only can He not, He won't. This passage says if a branch is dead and dying and it's not producing fruit, it's going to be cut off. It doesn't say if a branch is dead and dying, we're going to give it extra nutrients, we're going to work really hard to make sure that it's healthy, we're going to do all this, we're going to do all that. No, because the important thing is the health of the vine, not the specific branches. I asked you to take a look at this branch here. And like I said, eventually this will die. Eventually it will wither, and it won't be healthy anymore. I love plants. I love trees. I love all this stuff. I love being out in nature. And we had in my family this jade tree. Some of you know what a jade tree is. It's a succulent. They store water in their leaves. What's really interesting about these trees is that they can survive like almost anything. They're designed for the desert. They can survive almost anything. They store water in their leaves. And what happens is you're not supposed to water them every day. You're supposed to let them sit and maybe for a week or two at a time, and they'll take moisture from their leaves, and then you'll water them, and the leaves will kind of, they'll fill back up, and the plant will be healthy. Lisa and I, moved here just a couple months ago. I had 4 or 5 jade trees, and for some reason, they've all been dying. I can't figure it out. And I realized that they're not getting the right kind of sunlight. I'm putting them in the windows over there at the parsonage, but they're not getting the right kind of sunlight. They're not getting the right kind of nutrients. And so they're dying. They tip over and the trunk becomes moldy and mushy and they just die because they're not getting the right kind of nutrients. I have those plants just because I think they're pretty. I think they're cool looking. I like them. But the reality is that if we're talking about fruit, we're talking about plants that produce fruit, then they exist for a purpose that is more than just to be there and look nice. Okay? The church is not here just to look nice. I love our church. It's beautiful stained glass windows. We've got all this natural wood around here, the beautiful wood around here. You've got the beautiful stained glass behind me. That was one of the things that drew me to Roanoke first. When Elise and I came and visited, I walked in here and I thought, imagine the number of people, not who have come. Let me rephrase this. I walked in here and I didn't think, oh, this is a really cool looking church building. Look at how beautiful it is. I walked in here and thought, how many people since 1940, whenever this sanctuary was built, how many people have come down and given their lives to the Lord at this altar? How many people have sung these old songs of the church. I was talking with Charles right back in the foyer. What was the song that we sang right at the beginning, Dean? What's that? Come into his presence. So whatever the second one was, I can't remember. Love lifted me. Charles said, I can remember singing this when I was this high. And I'm thinking, how many people have sung songs like Love Lifted Me? How many people have sung songs like The Old Rugged Cross? How many people have sung the old songs of the church? How many people have come into this place with Jesus looking down on them, right there in the stained glass behind them, and given their lives to the Lord at the altar? But the reality is, church, that that's happened because there were people who were faithful in following after God, who were part of the vine, and would go out. They would invite people to come to church with them. They'd talk to them about Jesus, and the message of the Lord would spread. But the church in America has this epidemic of fearfulness of inviting people to come to church or talking to people about their religion, about their faith, their beliefs. Because in our culture today, you're not supposed to tell anybody that they need to believe something different than what they believe. And I believe that the church in America has a really hard challenge ahead of us to not be branches that are dead and dying, because it's almost like we are ashamed of the gospel. Remember that song, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ? Remember that song? Because I wasn't planning on saying this morning, church, but the Spirit's leading me in this way. There's a couple of layers. One, we've talked about the personal layer, right? If you're not producing fruit. We've talked about the church. And I want to think bigger picture now. For Roanoke First Church, how are we going to continue to reach people for Jesus? It starts with things like trunk or treats. Coming out and greeting people, meeting people, shaking their hands, saying, hey, would you ever want to come to church here? Come on, I'll sit by you, I'll buy you lunch afterwards. It starts with reaching out to that person next to you. You know what? I don't care if that young person who's in their 20s or 30s, you hear them cussing as they're working on their car, or there's beer cans in their front driveway. I don't care about that. Invite them to come to church. I want people to come to know Jesus. I don't care what you look like, what you smell like. I don't care what you're wearing. We were laughing this morning about some church, the usher was wearing a Bud Light shirt when he came down the aisle. I don't care about that. Come on down. I mean, maybe I do a little bit. We'll talk about it later, but I'd rather that person be in church. I'd rather that person be in church. And the only way we can do that is if we start to become a church that abides in Him. If we abide in Him, He will abide in us. The only way that we can have the ability to be Christ followers is if we abide in Him. If we abide in Him, He will abide in us. When we go out into the world, when we're at the grocery store, when we're in our neighborhood, at our workplace, if we have spent our time with the Lord, if we have taken time to invest in Him, He will produce fruit through our lives. This is what the passage says. John chapter 15 goes on to say some really interesting things here that we've already talked about. It says this, I have told you this so that joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. How joyful would you be if you knew that there were people who were here coming to church faithfully, who had given their lives to the Lord, because when you were at Kroger, when you were at, next to your neighbor, God spoke into your heart and your mind and said, maybe I ought to invite them to church. And they started coming to church. How great would that be? That my joy would be in you and that your joy would be complete. Oh, hallelujah. But the first step is abide in Him so that He can abide in us. This afternoon we have a specific way that we're going to close the service. And that is that we're going to partake in communion. Now you're thinking, Pastor, we didn't really talk much about communion today. You may not know what communion really is, and you guys can come up and start to uncover this here. In 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul says this, in chapter 11, verse 23. It says this, for I received from the Lord what I also passed on to you. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." I want to draw your attention to a few words here that Paul speaks. He says this in verse 23, "For I received from the Lord what I also passed on to you." Do you feel the weight of that sentence? It's an easy thing for us just to kind of think that he's saying, well, this is what I was told to do, so this is what we're going to do. No, he's saying, for what I received from the Lord, I also now pass on to you. If you're here, if you're in a relationship with God, then you're looking at this saying, I have received great grace and mercy and joy and love from God. Now, I also pass this on to you. That's what Paul is saying. Then the next thing that he says is, when you do this, do it in remembrance of me. Do it in remembrance of me. Meaning, we are not doing this for ourselves, as if somehow I am proving how good of a God follower I am if I partake in communion. We are doing this to remember the sacrifice that Jesus Christ made on the cross for us. And the last thing that I want to draw your attention to is this. In verse 26, "For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes again." What does that mean? It means these three things. One, we pass on what God has already given to us. Meaning if we are the vine, or if he is the vine and we are the branches, we ought to be taking those things that we've received from God, that blessing, that favor, that grace, that mercy, that love, that joy, the strength, the patience, the persistence, everything that we might ever say we have received from God. He did not give it to us so that we could hoard it. He did not give it to the church so that we could sit here and enjoy our time with a nice stained glass and all that. God did not come and die. He did not become a human, and come to this earth so that you and I could just sit here and be consumers. He came so that now we could also give it unto them. Abide in me and I will abide in you. And now take that and give it to others. The second is when you do it, you remember me. And the third is that you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. So here's what I want to challenge us in, church. We've talked about if you're a healthy branch, maybe God is going to prune you back. We've talked about if you're an unhealthy branch, you need to abide in him. We've talked about the big capital C church and how we need to be a church that is actively doing the mission and producing fruit in this world. We've talked about how we can't just be consumers. What's funny is we're about to come and consume something. Because this is a sign of something greater than us. This is an ancient practice for enjoying God. An ancient practice that's been practiced by Christians forever. And when we partake in this, God is doing something inside of us. So when you partake in communion, you are taking in the body and the blood of God, and you're proclaiming what he has done. Now, here's a few things about communion. It's something that's supposed to be done by believers. And in the Church of the Nazarene, we practice an open table. What that means is that it doesn't matter if you have Catholic roots or Baptist roots or anything like that. If you are a Christian, you can take communion. But that's the key thing. You see, you're proclaiming God's grace, his love, his death, his resurrection until he comes again. So this is also an opportunity for us to come into the fold. It's not the elements that save you. It's Jesus' death, life, and resurrection. So if you have never become a Christian before, this is an opportunity for you to do so. And what we're going to do is it's a little bit different. The ushers are already standing, so I apologize, guys. You're going to be standing for another minute or two. is this. We're going to just take a minute or two for some quiet reflection. And in this moment, if there are some things in your life that maybe you need to give over to the Lord, this would be a great time to do it. Maybe some things that you know are there that shouldn't be there. You can ask the Lord to forgive those, take those things, and move on from them. If you've never accepted Christ before, this is an opportunity for you to accept Him as your Savior. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have it quiet for a minute or two, and then I'm going to pray, and I'm going to lead in what's called a sinner's prayer. I don't like to call it that. I like to call it a salvation prayer. Okay? I like to pray this prayer, and if you'd like to accept Christ, you can pray that prayer along with me. So I'll give you that opportunity here in a few moments. But as we prepare to partake in communion, just for a minute or two, I'd like just some silence to listen to the music and pray, and just ask the Lord to just be near to you, and anything that might be in your life that you need to confess, you can confess, and spend some time before Him in prayer, and then I'll lead us in communion in just a moment.